Robert Monahan, and I'm here today with my friend Ben Nyberger.
Hey Bob, thanks for having me.
Ben and I were friends from childhood. We went to karate together.
Yes, we did Taekwondo probably for, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years together.
Yeah. You were a black belt when we stopped, right?
I was, and I was the bigger kid then.
It
just hasn't worked that way now.
And now Ben is a trust and estates attorney. He does elder planning, Medicaid planning, special needs trusts, estate planning in general.
Yes, we just try to help out families when they're in need and when kind of the bad things happen or something isn't working.
Yeah. And did you always want to do that kind of work, or did you?
No, had no idea I wanted to do this. And there was a time I was in a mid-law career working for a large law firm. And my job was to get large corporations, large income tax deductions for paying their executives an insane amount of money, and that just really touched my heart.
You know, I had a similar experience when I worked for insurance companies.
Right.
Defending personal injury cases. It's very touching work.
So at one time, it was a time to change careers, and I went and did something else and found an area where I could actually help people and be a good person as a lawyer. Can you imagine that?
I like that, and that's great. I feel like I do the same thing with personal injury cases.
Right. I mean, we just help families get to where it is and understand what they need to know to make decisions, and you make sure they're whole.
And now you have your own firm.
Yes.
It has 5 lawyers and 5 support staff, right?
Sure.
So 10 attorneys or 10 people working for you.
Yes.
And your firm's called Generation Law?
It's called Generation Law. That's www.generationlaw.com. And we're based right by O'Hare Airport.
By Elmhurst, right?
Yeah, but it's the north end of Elmhurst. So if you can get to O'Hare Airport,
you can
add 7 minutes and you're at my office.
Excellent. And how long have you been running Generation Law?
So we've been open since 2003.
Okay, and you know what's really interesting? It's something that I really want to do someday. Is you wrote a book.
Yes.
Brighter Skies. And I read the book, and we're going to talk about it a little bit today.
Yeah, great. Happy to share.
Yeah. What inspired you to write a book?
You know, when families come in and something happens, especially, and this is in the elder care arena, and when something happens to mom and dad, a lot of people don't know what to do, and you search on the internet and you try to find out what's going on, and there's so many things you don't know what to do first. And as you're looking at this, there's usually a crisis. And to try to sift through all of this information when you have a crisis is hard. And I looked at all of the top 10, I looked at actually the top 10 books in the elder care arena as on Amazon.
Yeah.
And they're all this thick.
Right.
What person who has to take care of their mom and dad or their loved one has the time to read a book this thick and fill out all the forms? And so what we did is I took all of those ideas and I distilled them into 10 concepts that once you understand these, you're smart enough to figure the rest of it out.
That's great.
So if somebody doesn't have the time, this nails it down to what the essence is, and then you go from there.
That's great. And the book is called Brighter Skies. It's available on Amazon, right?
Yes.
And do you sell it on your website too, or do you?
No, we just sell it through Amazon.
Just through Amazon, okay. And what was the process like writing a book? How did you ever find the time? I would love to do it, but it's I got to be a real act of discipline and love, right?
So it's hard. I'm not a writer, but I never shut up. So I always talk. So what I did is I had my research and I had my outlines. I did a lot of research. I probably did maybe 100 hours of research. And then I had my notes, and then I actually dictated most of the book.
Yeah.
I just knew what the concepts were, and I dictated it, and we had some people transcribe the dictations, and then I had an editor kind of massage it into what we wanted to do.
Nice. Now it starts out with a love story. It starts out with a story about a couple.
Sure.
And mom of the couple, mom and dad are elderly. They have some children, right?
Right.
And mom is suffering from dementia. And dad comes to see you and doesn't know what to do.
Right. And in the love story, they've been married for 50 years.
Yeah.
And the husband doesn't understand the way Alzheimer's works. And he tells me that one of the best days in his life were when his mother-in-law died. And now his wife is having these hallucinations of his mother-in-law. And he's terrified at taking care of his wife and terrified that she's having apparitions. And then she's having apparitions of the mother-in-law. And he's just going nuts. And she'll see the mother-in-law in the corner, and then he'll tell her the mother-in-law isn't there, and she says, okay. And then 3 minutes later, when her memory resets because of the disease process, he sees her again and he didn't understand it, and it was causing him stress and causing his heart and it has a whole bunch of other things. And so we were able to intervene and teach him what really was going on, and then he was able to make some decisions that allowed him to not be the primary caregiver, because the issue for him was caregiving stress, and we were afraid he was going to drop dead of a heart attack first. And so we got him to back off on that and get his wife great care, at least in the first part of the story.
That's a really important point, I think, that you make throughout the book, that I think a lot of people aren't aware of, and that's caretaker stress.
You know, it's the kid. You know, everybody focuses on mom or dad who's sick. And the person who's holding all the glue together is the caregiver. And the caregivers feel so guilty if they take some time for themselves and they're not managing the person that they're giving care to every second, that they are essentially, it's the metaphor of the forest and the trees. They see the trees but not the forest. And as the stress goes up, it impairs their decision making, and they don't know they'd be making bad decisions. Or if they stress themselves out and they die first, who's going to step in? Who's
going to take care of mom?
And when you have a couple that's been together 50 years, are the kids going to be as good as the spouse?
You know, I think you called it. Did you call it the Superman syndrome?
So we have something that in our culture,
Superwoman
it's the daughter,
right?
It's the
daughter
syndrome.
handles everything for mom, right? Or
right.
Dad,
in our culture, it's my perception that every daughter needs to have the proverbial superhero cape and do the best job in the world for their parents. And what they don't know is, to do a good job for your parents, they got to be able to step back, have their head screwed on straight, get the break.
Right? Put your own oxygen mask on first.
Yes, that's the metaphor, the airplane metaphor.
Yeah, go ahead and explain that a little bit. Just
so you're sitting on the airplane, everybody says the oxygen drops and the masks drop down, and you put them on and know they're not going to inflate, but you put them on yourself first before the child.
Right.
So you don't pass out first, and then you know, at least the child gets oxygen. And that's the metaphor in the caregiving, and it's so hard because it's so emotional. It happens over such a long time. But once smart people understand, oh my gosh, here's the concept. Let's take care of me so I can take care of you.
Right.
And when they understand that and they know that it's okay, then they're able to advocate better, and the person actually gets much better care.
Yeah, I think caregiver stress was just a great theme in that book. I saw it myself with my assistant. My assistant cared for her father this past year while he was dying of cancer.
Right.
And
it's tough.
It was tough on her.
It destroys the strongest people.
She read your book, by the way.
Oh yeah.
She read your book.
Glad it helped.
And she gave it to her friends.
Yeah, that's good.
You know, she managed. But one thing I think we talked about her learning from her book is to assemble a team. So
Correct.
She wasn't doing everything herself. She was doing a lot herself. And I think she learned from your book that it's important to assemble a whole team of people to help you.
You've got to have a whole team of people. You know, you can only rely on yourself for so long before you need a break. And then as it expands to different family members and friends, you call in all your favors one at a time. And then you've got to make sure you have the right doctors. And one of the least sexy areas of medical practice is geriatrics. It just isn't.
PCP that does geriatric work.
And the issue is the current insurance system will pay for the number of transactions, the number of tests, and with the geriatric patient, the doctors need to spend a lot of time with each individual to see what's going on. And so they're not the highest compensated area of medical practice.
But it's a very hard medical.
It very is, because it's difficult, because the stuff that
go ahead.
Sure. The way that medications affect you and I, it works differently in an elderly body.
My dad is an internist. And we've talked about, I think, how internists are undervalued.
Oh, absolutely.
They have to be able to spot all the issues that need to be spotted, like in law school kind of.
Right.
I mean,
they're more skilled than we are. But still.
Right. And then send them to the right specialist after identifying the issues that need to be addressed.
True.
But you have to have a really broad base of knowledge when you're a primary care physician, especially for geriatric patients.
Oh, absolutely. And then you also want to have some social workers to help out, because sometimes the disease changes the personality. and then you have to go in and deal with counseling, and sometimes you got fighting family members, and you have trauma, and sometimes we have social workers in private practice, we call them care managers, who can go in and help deal with it, or if the hospital is doing something funky, and you need advocacy in the hospital, it's a great team member to have, and you want to be able to line them up before it's an emergency.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like when the health is declining, it's time to start assembling the team.
Sure.
So we talked about a doctor, a primary care doctor that specializes in geriatric medicine.
Right.
We talked about
that returns calls. Make sure
returns calls.
Yeah.
We'll get to the lawyers in the end because they can be really.
Because they're the best. Yes.
They come last.
Right.
So we've talked about social workers. Where would you go to find a social worker for your family?
So the hospitals can refer them, but there's a organization of care managers, and it's caremanager.org.
Okay.
And it's a trade group, and you can put in the zip code finder and find those near you. They may charge $75 an hour, or $100 an hour, or $150 an hour, depending on their skill. But boy, can they save your skin and save your energy. And with a couple hours, sometimes they can just point you in the right direction that really saves your energy for the other things you want to devote it to.
And the next class of professionals that I wanted to talk about were accountants and financial planners, because that kind of surprised me.
Well, it's access to money, and it's cash flow.
Cash flow and taxes.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, by the way, we should say Ben is also a CPA. You're a CPA, right?
Yes, but my CPA told me that I wasn't allowed to do tax returns anymore after he saw what I did. But I do know all the tax things.
Right.
I just don't fill out the forms. But the interesting thing about the taxes is you want to make, as you deplete assets to pay for care, you want to do it in a tax efficient manner.
Right.
There's sometimes when you take care of a parent, you can get an income tax deduction for your parent as a dependent for the expensive things that you're doing. Or your parents will be able to get a deduction for nursing home care, which is a huge offset if you're having to bleed down the IRAs and pay the income taxes on the IRA distributions. The financial planners are important because they can help you with generating revenue. Now, if you don't have a lot of money to invest, there's only so much that can come out of it, but maybe they could get you another couple months of private care, but also get you access to your funds with a single telephone call.
Right. So we've talked about the doctor.
Yes.
We've talked about the social worker, the care manager,
yes.
The accountant, and the financial planner. And their job is to minimize their taxes, increase maybe the cash flow and the revenue you have coming in so you can afford more care.
Right, because sometimes if you're out of money, you're out of options.
Right.
So we want to make the money last as long as possible so that you have choice for care.
Is there anyone I'm leaving out before we get to the lawyer?
No, we should get to the lawyers because
that's the most important part. Okay.
Yes.
What about? I feel like I'm missing someone, but let's just say the doctor, the social worker, the accountant, the financial planner, and finally the lawyer.
So the reason that the lawyer is important is the lawyer prepares the documentation that allows you to step into your parents' shoes or your loved one's shoes to make decisions for them when they cannot. If you do not have these documents, they're called powers of attorney. There's a healthcare one, there's a finance one. If you don't have the financial power of attorney and you want to get to the bank account to pay bills, you might have to go to court and file a guardianship and have an elected judge make decisions for you.
Right, and that can be $5,000 to $10,000.
It's really expensive. Yeah. And even though I make a good portion of my living for it, and I think it's a wonderful thing, none of the families agree. And if you don't have the powers of attorney, if you have the powers of attorney, you may not have to have that extra drain on the estate of the transactional costs of getting access to the money and having somebody outside your family look over your shoulder to see whether you should do something or not.
How should we start out talking about this? I'd like to step back a little bit. Or do you want to finish up with the powers of attorney?
The powers of
That's
attorney.
Where we started. Yeah,
the powers of attorney are just documents that allow you to do surrogate decision making. Just because you're somebody's spouse does not mean you have rights to make decisions.
It's interesting, isn't it?
The doctors may look at you as a surrogate or obey what you say, kind of, but if the things get rough and the rough decisions and they hide behind the risk management attorneys in the hospital and you don't have the powers of attorney, you may not be able to make the decisions, and that may make you very unhappy.
Now, powers of attorney, we should say, are only effective while the person is alive
Right.
or incapacitated.
Well, the powers of attorney will allow you, based on when they start. Sometimes they start when they sign, sometimes there's a date, sometimes you need a doctor's note. It depends on the language and the powers of attorney. And when you stop breathing, they stop working.
Right.
Now,
Only effective while you're alive.
Correct.
But can't make decisions.
Right, and the other thing with the power of attorney is if your mom and dad's power of attorney, you can't do something that mom and dad don't want you to do. It doesn't give you power over them to do whatever you think's the best thing to do. It gives you power to implement their decisions as they would tell you.
It's directions.
If
right?
they tell you no, you're toast, stop, no.
Right.
A lot of people don't think that.
They think I have the power of the attorney.
I have the
power to act
control.
here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So a power of attorney, there's two flavors, like we said before.
Sure.
Healthcare and property, right?
And in each state, you might have a different name for them.
Right.
And
right.
so a power of attorney for healthcare might be called an advanced directive, an advanced medical directive, a physician's directive, a healthcare power of attorney. The power of attorney for finance may be called a financial power of attorney, a power of attorney for property, that's what it's called in Illinois. There's different nouns that they use for this. And it just depends on where you are. But the general concept is one controls money, one controls healthcare while you are alive.
While you're alive. So before we get to the will and trust, which control when you're passed away.
It controls, now the trust will control when you're alive and when you're dead.
Okay,
And
right,
the will controls when you're
when
dead.
you're dead.
So here's the metaphor for the trust. Imagine a bowl of candy, and the bowl is the trust, and the candy is the metaphor for your assets. Once we put the candy inside the trust, that's called funding the trust. The trustee is the one who holds the bowl and who can move the candy out of the bowl, and the person who can eat the candy is called the beneficiary. When you set up a general estate planning trust, you have your bowl, you hold it, it's your candy, you can eat as much candy as you want until you get a stomachache and then you get stopped because you'll get sick. If something happens to you, somebody else is holding the bowl, and while you're alive, they can feed you the candy. When you die, somebody else holds the bowl, and there's rules. The rules say, pay my debts, split it evenly between my kids. Fine. It avoids the dreaded probate. Only if things are in the metaphorical bowl. And that's the easiest way to explain how a trust works, because you have the bowl while you're alive, and it's still in existence when you die.
Yeah. Now, let's step back.
Sure.
Because we want to talk about the three categories of assets and say to people that assets pass differently depending upon the asset when you die.
So there's three categories of assets. When an estate planner sits down with them, they're going to ask you, what assets do you own and how are they owned? And you'll be like, this is stupid. They just want to know how rich I am. But no. So imagine that instead of one candy bowl, we have three.
Right.
And your assets go in one of the three candy bowls, and each candy bowl has a separate set of rules that say what happens when somebody dies. So when we do estate planning, we look at what candy bowls your stuff in, what candy bowls do we want to use, and then we move the things to different candy bowls depending on the plan that we come up with, which deals with whatever your preferences are. So there are assets that transfer with a beneficiary designation.
Like life insurance.
Right. Life insurance, 401k, IRA, brokerage accounts that are transfer on death accounts, bank accounts that are pay on death accounts. Any form that has somebody's name on it, whoever's name's on it, gets it when you die. Simple, simple. Except if you have lots of these accounts and you have lots of different places you want it to go and somebody changes, you got to change all of the beneficiaries, and sometimes that can get difficult. I've seen situations after a divorce where the old spouse wasn't taken off the account. And then the new person dies and the new spouse doesn't get anything because the beneficiaries weren't changed. Or I've seen things where mom and dad, they're 80 and they have beneficiaries all over the place, and daughter gets in a car accident and has a traumatic brain injury. Or she marries somebody who's horrible. They don't want the spouse to get it in the divorce. They got to change all of these forms, and it's a lot of things to track. So that's one of the three bowls.
So the first bowl is beneficiary designated assets.
Yes.
That's number one. What's number two?
So number two is the automatic, and that includes the trust that we just talked about. And it also includes assets that are held in joint tenancy. You have a joint bank account, you own the car jointly, you own the house jointly. It's short for joint tenancy with rights of survivorship. The last one alive gets it. Now, a lot of people will avoid probate by putting their kid on the title to the house. It's an easy way to do it. It screws up Medicaid later, but if your child gets a judgment creditor or a bankruptcy or something like that happens, they're coming after your half of the house because you put them on. So you don't necessarily want a child as a joint tenant on your account, a bank account, or
if
your
that child gets in trouble, you're in trouble.
Exactly. Yeah. It's okay to have your spouse on there, because then if you do something bad, your spouse can't kick you out of the house. But typically, most couples have house and joint tenancy, car and joint tenancy, joint checking accounts, and they have IRAs and life insurance that has the other spouse as the beneficiary. The first one dies, it easily goes to the other spouse, but it all sets in our third candy bowl, which are called probate assets.
Probate assets.
Probate assets are assets that aren't in joint tenancy, they aren't in the trust, there's no beneficiary on them, there's just one person on the account. Those are probate assets. The guidebook for probate is called your will. If you don't have a will, the state of Illinois has made up a will for you that says half to spouse, half to kids. Maybe you don't want that. So you have a will that says all to spouse.
Before we want, some people think that if you die without a will, your assets go to the state.
That's what the state of Illinois really wants.
They would love that,
but that's not what happens.
Right, yeah.
There are default rules.
Intestacy.
Yes,
yeah.
It's called so imagine Moses, when he came down from the mountain, he had the testaments, the Ten
Commandments.
The 10 Commandments,
yeah.
Which is a testament, and that became a will. If you die with a will, you die testate. If you don't have a will, the lawyers always like to put nouns on it so you don't understand what the heck it is. Intestate.
Wow.
So if you die both through intestate, you don't have a will, and there's rules. So example, if you are married, no kids, goes to your spouse. If you're married with kids, half to spouse, half to kids. If you don't have kids and you got brothers and sisters and parents, it goes to the brothers and sisters and parents. If your parents are dead, it goes to the brothers and sisters. So there's a way of doing it, but it doesn't go to the state. It only goes to the state if you die single and you have no relatives.
Okay.
Then it actually goes to the county.
Do you need a will if you have a trust? Is a question a lot of people.
So yeah, if you have a trust, remember you have these 3 bowls. And so if you got everything in that middle bowl with the trust, there's always stuff that's not in the trust bowl. A car, a small bank account, your clothes, something like that. So we have a will that treats that like spilt milk. We gather up the spilt milk and we pour it over into the trust.
It's called a pour-over will.
A pour-over will.
Yeah.
Now here's the trick. In Illinois, different states are different, but in Illinois, if you have less than $100,000 of probate assets and no real estate there, you can use an affidavit for a small estate called a small estate affidavit, so you don't have to go to court. The lawyers hate this because we'd rather you go to court so we can make more money. But what it really is, it's a convenient for the family. If there's one bank account or there's a car or something, you just fill out a form. If there's a will, you attach the will, and it automatically transfers without it going to court. And so you have the pour-over will to get the old credit union account or the refund of your last health insurance premium. That's always a good one. That you take, pour over into the trust, and the trust distributes it.
Got it. Now, we have a little time left,
Sure.
and I know it's not a lot of time.
Uh-huh.
Are you willing to talk for about 5 or 10 minutes about probate? Because I don't think we've talked about probate assets, that if
Sure.
it's not jointly owned,
Yeah.
it's not a beneficiary designated asset, and it's not in a trust, it is a probate asset.
Uh-huh.
What is probate court, and what does probate court do?
So everybody demonizes probate. They think it's the worst thing in the world, and in many cases, it's not. If you construct an estate plan to avoid probate by using a trust, it's a more expensive estate plan because you need to pay the attorney to create the trust.
It's up front. It's more expensive.
It's up front. Probate's all on the back end. If there's probate in your estate, you're only paying for it after you're done using your money. But let's say you're going to go through the probate process, which is the legal process through court where you pay all the creditors, you settle all the claims, and then you transfer the ownership of the asset from the person who died, the decedent, to whoever's inheriting.
According to the will.
If there's a will,
If there's
yes.
a will.
If there's not a will, you have those default rules that we talked about. So how does probate really work?
Yeah.
Okay. So if somebody dies, if they die with a will, you die testate. If you die without a will, you die intestate. Okay, fine. If you have a will, you file a will with the probate court, and then you need to open the probate process, open the probate case. What do? Essentially, the lawyer fills out a bunch of different forms that talks about who you were, copy your death certificate, when did you die, when were you born, who all the family are that are named in the will, and who would inherit if you didn't have a will. And then the judge looks at that, and they open up the probate. If you died without a will intestate, you've got to get everybody who gets under the default rules to sign a waiver, or you got to give them 30 days notice so they can all show up to court and say so-and-so shouldn't be in charge. So you have this first court hearing, the judge looks at all of the documentation, and then it opens the estate and appoints somebody to administer the estate.
Right, with letters of office, right?
So there's a lot of antiquated nouns that are used with this. If you die with a will, the person who does stuff is called the executor. If you die without a will, the same exact person doing the same exact thing is called an administrator. And the court, once the estate is opened, issues a piece of paper that allows the executor or the administrator to go around and collect all the bank accounts and sell the car and sell the house and all do that. And they're called letters of office, your office as the executor or the administrator. And sometimes they're called letters testamentary because we don't want anybody to know what this means. But it's letters for a will testamentary.
Now, I think a lot of people think that, hey, once I have my will, I'm set. I'll take the will to the bank after Dad dies or whatever.
Right.
I'll get the money and we'll be great. It'll be
Yeah,
fine. No, that doesn't work like you have to go to court with the will.
So so the judge looks at the will and makes sure that the legal formalities related to the signing of the will are okay. And if some family members thinks there was something wrong or something wasn't too kosher, it was done,
You have a will contest.
You have a will contest, and they go and they have a certain amount of time to contest the will to say that, look, Dad signed the will, Betty twisted Dad's arm to sign the will this way, and all of that kind of family strife, and it has to be done within a certain period of time, which is why everybody needs notice that the estate was open. Everybody named in the will, everybody who wasn't named in the will, so everybody has a chance, if they want, to contest the provisions or the validity of the will. That happens rarely, but when it happens, it's like an explosion. So after that, you also need to give creditors 6 months to make a claim that the estate owes them money. And so you have to publish notice in the newspaper, and the newspapers all charge a couple $100 for the notice, and then you have to send notice out to the creditors.
It does cut off claims though, which is nice, right?
Which is nice. So the advantage of probate is if you've got a bunch of wacky stuff out there, you don't know where it's coming. If you go through probate, within 6 months of opening the estate, if everybody's notified appropriately, on day 6 month and 1 day, you're toast. We had a case where there was a family that had Medicaid for a severely disabled child, and Medicaid spent $300,000 on this child, and they had a $500,000 estate when they died, and the state of Illinois forgot and missed the creditor's deadline.
So all that money is cut off. They don't get to recover that from the estate.
Right, partly why our state's out of money, but
Yeah.
but it's very, very good because within 6 months you know where the problems are, and then when they file the claims, then you can fight the claims if you want to
So
fight the
probate
claims.
has its advantages. It's not necessarily all bad. You've been listening to Ben Nyberger. Ben, thanks for coming on my show.
Oh,
The book is Brighter Skies. Again, it's a short book. It guides families through 10 principles that you should really think about and follow when you have a family member that's sick
Right.
and needs help.
Yeah.
Ben, thanks for coming.